Hi, this is Ash editing right now. I just wanted to let you guys know that the first 2 minutes of the product have really horrible audio and video quality. I was recording them at 11:30 on Tuesday night, and I did not get the chance to double check, but I promise it does get better over the course of the video, so just stick around. But for the first 2 minutes, it looks like I'm recording on a potato, but it does get better, I promise.
Hi, my name is Ash, and I'm a film nerd. I grew up right before kids' movies went corporate, back when Illumination was just a long, fancy word meaning light, and Despicable Me was still a one off comedy. Obviously, I'm not trying to say that things were better back in my day, but seeing constant trailers for Trolls World Tour and the newest Disney remakes made me long for the days of yore. But I'm getting off topic. The concept of an alternative or experimental narrative is inherently broad and subjective. One might argue that the Hiroshima scene in the third season of Twin Peaks is an experimental narrative, while someone else might say that Moonrise Kingdom falls under that same description. Because of this, I set out to analyze these 6 films knowing that no two would be exactly the same. I'm not going to try and argue that Eraserhead and Doctor Strangelove follow the exact same filmmaking and narrative conventions. In fact, let me give a definition of what I understand to be an experimental narrative, or rather, the parameters that I set when I was choosing these films. An experimental narrative tells a story in a way that's different from the established norm, either using visuals, tone, or chronology. A film like Missions of the Afternoon uses experimental visuals to tell its story, while something like Rushmore plays more with tone and perspective. I'll also be giving minor spoilers for some of the films, so sorry about that, and you should definitely watch all of the films on this list if you haven't already. With those disclaimers out of the way, let's get into the films.
Well, I'll tell you what he did. He ordered his planes to attack your country. Well, let me finish, Dimitri.
This was the first film that I watched as a part of this project, and I have to say I came into it not really expecting much. Jesus, was I wrong. First, a quick summary. Dr. Strangelove, or explores the consequences of American officers being able to authorize nuclear war. When General Jack Ripper goes insane and orders pilots over Russia to bomb the country, the president and his war council scramble to counteract what is essentially heating up the Cold War. One of the things I keep being fascinated by is Kubrick's attention to detail when it comes to designing sets. I'll talk about Alex's room in A Clockwork Orange later, but every location in this film is incredible. The war room is iconic, sure, but the hotel room at the beginning of the movie, General Ripper's office, Major Kong's plane, every button, framed photo, and glass of wine speak volumes about the characters and the setting in ways that dialogue couldn't hope to achieve. I was also intrigued by the tone of the film. Despite the core of the screenplay being a comedy co-written by Peter Sellers, Terry Southern, Peter George, and Kubrick himself, the film also has a bleak, nihilistic outlook on the Cold War and nuclear warfare. It uses satire to leave its audience with an empty feeling in their stomach. You could describe it as dark absurdism. I will, for the rest of the video. The humor is off-kilter and, though hilarious, slightly disturbing. Though it's nowhere near as disturbing as
Try the wine.
From this neo-70s apocalyptic satire, I moved on to another neo-70s apocalyptic satire. Yeah, we're going to see a lot of common threads between these two films. If you haven't seen A Clockwork Orange already, first of all, watch it. It's amazing. But it's essentially a character study of Alex DeLarge, a young gang member in a dystopian future who submits to behavioral modification training after he's arrested for murder. Now, I mentioned earlier that Alex's room is an excellent example of Kubrick's attention to detail when it came to set design. The bright and pointy comforter alone creates a sense of atmosphere complemented by the Beethoven poster, the large circular light, or even the snake in the dresser drawer. The entire film feels like watching an Elton John tribute to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It gave me the distinct impression of a 1970s atmosphere that was just slightly off-kilter from the 1970s that we remember. Like looking through a kaleidoscope. The only way I'm able to describe this movie is through metaphor. It also follows through on the dark absurdism that we see pockets of in Doctor Strangelove or... In fact, the movie whose name I'm going to stop saying is the only film on my list that wasn't rated R. It's PG. It's the rating that allows Clockwork Orange to go absolutely bonkers and provide a really excellent critique on the nature of violence and its enticing effect on teens. And there are kind of disturbing parallels between Alex DeLarge and the alt-right teenage population right now, but anyway. There's even a word for the pastime that Alex and his droogs frequent. Ultraviolence. Like, come on. It was really refreshing to see Kubrick explore concepts so plainly and explicitly rather than the sterile tiptoeing of Doctor Strangelove. I could go on and on about the MPAA, but I was really happy to see a film that was a critique of desensitization presented with little to no censoring. Well, here we are. This film was by far the most experimental of the ones on my list, and I loved it. Essentially, it follows a father, Henry Spencer, as he struggles to take care of his newborn child for just one night. As an avid Twin Peaks fan, I was pleased to see the beginnings of David Lynch's iconic and bizarre style. It was easy to draw parallels between this movie and the later seasons of the show. The film felt easy to understand. It wielded metaphor expertly without needing to hold your hand during the more experimental sequences. I really like the scenes with the lady in the radiator, probably because they were the most out there segments of the film. The exploration of sexuality, specifically the desolate vision of industrialist celibacy, was also very intriguing. There are very few leading male characters, most of them being relegated to one-off appearances. However, the lady in the radiator, Mary X, and the beautiful girl from across the hall, as she's billed, pop up frequently throughout as representations of Henry's sexual experiences. The BGATH, or BGATH, ends up making out with him in his room and is filmed suggestively every time she's on screen. Her last appearance shows her leading another man into her room. In stark contrast to this is Mary X, Henry's wife and the mother to his child, portrayed as hysterical, petty, and decidedly chaste. The lady in the radiator seems to embody both of these characters, sweet but not homely, and she's shown embracing Henry after he kills his child at the end of the film. The desolate and minimalistic feeling of the world around the characters brings this trichotomy to the forefront of the film.
Alright, let's hit the fucking road.
Now this one was just weird. I'd probably rank it the lowest out of the films that I watched, mostly for the same things that I praised Eraserhead for. Just as a quick recap, when Jeffrey Beaumont discovers the severed ear in the fields behind his house, he follows its trail to Dorothy Valens, a lounge singer from the wrong side of the tracks. Jeffrey is quickly drawn into Dorothy's world as he works to expose a psychotic drug dealer who has kidnapped her husband and son. While the dream sequences in Eraserhead take up the majority of the movie, they're just out there enough for you to understand that they aren't really happening. Blue Velvet keeps the dreamlike tone, but attempts to stay grounded in reality. In particular, the main villain, Frank Booth, is downright cartoonish, talking and acting like an old-fashioned gangster combined with a sixth grader who just learned what swear words are. It's jarring and unnatural in the gritty atmosphere that Lynch tries to set up. I found it interesting how the story handled its pacing. As I was watching, my first impression of the film was that it was realistic, mostly because there isn't really a climax. Things just sort of happen. Sandy and Jeffrey are making out at a dance, and then 15 minutes later, our boy Jeff is hiding in a closet waiting to shoot Frank Booth in the head. It was a weird combination of refreshing and jarring, sort of like drinking iced hot chocolate. You know how hot chocolate is supposed to feel in your mouth, and you're not totally sure if you're okay with the new mouthfeel. You come into the film without any understanding of the stakes or the rules of the world, and I thought that this style of pacing made it feel like you were really in Jeffrey's head learning information along with him, sort of like a highlight reel of his best moments. I'd like to be upfront about something. If you want to disown me from the pretentious film community, feel free, but here goes. This was the first Us Lent film I watched. With that out of the way, I have to say I was so pleasantly surprised by the experience of this film. From the very first moments when a woman drives out into a field to kill a donkey, we're thrust into a world so strange and so different from our own, and are drip-fed exposition throughout the rest of the film. The basic premise of the movie is as follows. Humanity has devolved to the point where single people are forced to find a partner within 45 days, or they'll be transformed into an animal of their choice. That's all I'm willing to say. Of all the films on this list, I encourage you to watch this one the most. This film was a really wonderful introduction to the Lanthimos style, my favorite piece of small world building, and something that I think the next film, The Killing of a Sacred Deer, falls a bit short on, is the awkward, stilting, almost childlike dialogue. Characters will share simple things with each other, like what they had for breakfast or whether or not they dance at parties. Humanity has been dulled down to the point where people have simply run out of conversation. They've even got special characteristics, small things that they must have in common with their partner in order for them to become a couple. This works so well towards the building of the world of the film. As someone who's become numb to the constant Hunger Games dystopia ripoffs, this take on a dystopia that so accurately critiques our perception of love and partnership was really refreshing, and I really enjoyed it.
That time, I thought I was the only one who ate spaghetti that way. Me and my dad. Later, of course, I found out that everyone eats spaghetti the exact same way.
This, of course, was the last film on my list. Lanthimos really plays up the dissonance of the Lobster here, going from a violent exploration of a dystopian future to just a straight-up horror movie. A cardiovascular surgeon befriends a fatherless teenager, but soon realizes that the boy's intentions are sinister as his family becomes sick with a mysterious and untreatable illness. I don't know how to describe the atmosphere of this film other than it feels like dissociating. Part of the reason why I say this is Lanthimos' affinity for long, dragging on wide shots. The poster for the film exemplifies this perfectly, and it's carried over throughout the film. I felt like someone had put a camera into the walls of the hospital in the family's home, which added a sense of eerie realism and helped to create tension in an unconventional way. Normally, directors would use close shots of the characters' faces to create a feeling of tension, fear, or guilt, but Lanthimos defaults to wide shots of the characters in a space, or slow zooms over the course of a scene. This technique leaves you on the edge of your seat, since you're never quite sure if something is going to happen, especially in the scenes with Martin, who one could argue is the main villain of the film. Another production aspect that created a unique and disturbing atmosphere was the use of score, or lack thereof. Throughout the film, musical stings are used to accentuate points or underscore scenes, but they're so far from actual music that it feels almost diegetic. The slamming of piano keys in seemingly mundane segments makes you feel uncomfortable and on edge, and it supplements the wide shots perfectly. I was always aware of the fact that things could go wrong at any moment, which I believe is what Lanthimos was intending with these artistic choices. Overall, I thought the music provided jump scares in a new way, as opposed to the tiring, it gets really, really quiet and then somebody yells jump scares popularized by Blumhouse and other cheap horror movies. It's exciting and engaging.
So, people want to give you a card?
So, here we are, 6 films later. What do we learn, boys and girls? I was struck by how much fun this was. I mean, I love watching movies, obviously, but I rarely have time to watch anything anymore. With the lack of structure of Shelter at Home combined with it being my second semester of my junior year, the only things that I really do anymore is work, eat, sleep, and scroll through Twitter if I ever get bored. This project forced me to do a thing that I forgot that I loved to do, and would you believe it, I had a lot of fun. I also found a bunch of films that were either inspiration for the films on this list, or past projects from the directors that I'm going to watch over the summer. Analyzing these films reignited my love of filmmaking, and inspired me to watch more films as a pastime when I used to think of it as a time waster. Or inspiration for my nightmares. That scene with the child's head on Henry's body will forever be burned into my brain. Ugh.